The evening had started like any other busy night at the Grand Hotel, with warm lights glowing over polished floors and soft music floating in the air. People in elegant clothes walked past the staff without even noticing them, talking about business deals, vacations, and upcoming charity auctions. The event was an annual gala, known for its high-profile guests and expensive decorations. Everything about it felt distant and unreachable for someone like the quiet waitress, who had been working since early afternoon dot. She moved silently between the tables, carrying trays of sparkling drinks and small plates. She kept her head lowered, partly out of habit and partly because she felt out of place around people who lived such different lives. Though she had worked in many events before, this one felt even more overwhelming. The guests spoke with confidence, their laughter echoing through the hall as if the entire world belonged to them. She tried not to focus on that. Her job was to serve and return to the kitchen quickly, making sure nothing spilled, nothing broke, and no one complained. Her supervisor always said, "The best service is the one that goes unnoticed." So she tried to make herself invisible, but even in her quiet way, she had something that made her different. She sometimes hummed when she worked, not loudly, just softly under her breath, like a habit she carried from childhood. It helped her stay calm when the room became too loud or when the pressure built up. She didn't think anyone ever heard her. But that night, someone did. A group of guests stood near one of the tall tables, holding glasses of expensive wine. They seemed slightly bored, waiting for the entertainment to begin. The pianist who was supposed to play for the evening had canceled at the last moment because of an emergency. This left a gap in the schedule, and the event organizer was trying to find a replacement. The guests talked about it casually, as if the lack of music were simply another inconvenience. Imagine paying so much for this event and not even getting music. One of them joked, another shrugged. They should have planned better. The waitress approached with her tray, ready to replace the empty glasses with fresh ones. As she set the new glasses down, one of the guests looked at her and raised an eyebrow. Something about the faint humming she had been doing caught his attention. "You hum well," he said, sounding amused and not entirely polite. She froze, unsure if she should apologize or say thank you. "Sorry, sir," she murmured, trying to move away. No," he continued, clearly enjoying the moment. "Since the real pianist didn't show up, maybe you can take his place? You sound like you might know a little something about music." The people around him laughed lightly, not in a cruel way, but with the amused tone of people who believed such an idea was impossible. The waitress felt her face warm with embarrassment. She shook her head quickly. "I can't, sir." She hoped he would drop the subject, but he didn't. Why not? "It's just for fun. Come on, the room needs something to wake it up." She was about to step away when the event organizer, who had overheard the conversation, came over. He looked exhausted and stressed, clearly struggling to manage the schedule. "What's going on here?" he asked. The guest smiled. "Your waitress hums beautifully. If she can hum, maybe she can play the piano. It's worth a try, isn't it?" The organizer looked at her with curiosity. "Do you know how to play anything at all? Even something simple? We really need music." Her heart pounded. She felt trapped between wanting to stay invisible and not wanting to disappoint her boss. She rarely talked about her past, and even fewer people knew she had grown up learning to play the piano. It had been a big part of her childhood, something she poured her heart into before life pulled her in a different direction. I haven't played in a long time," she whispered. The organizer offered a gentle smile. "That's okay. Even a few soft notes will help." She looked around and noticed that several guests were now watching. Their eyes made her uncomfortable, as if she were standing under a spotlight she never asked for. But something inside her, perhaps a small, forgotten part that missed the piano, pushed her to nod slightly. "All right," she said softly. A few guests clapped lightly, more in amusement than encouragement. She didn't take it personally. People like them never expected much from someone wearing a staff uniform. She walked slowly toward the grand piano placed near the center of the hall. It stood there untouched, its polished surface reflecting the warm lights. She felt a mix of fear and longing strengthen with every step. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it. She had spent years avoiding real pianos because they reminded her of dreams she could no longer chase. When she reached the piano, she hovered for a moment before sitting down. The seat felt unfamiliar under her, and the keys looked larger and brighter than she remembered. She placed her fingers lightly on the keys, but didn't press down right away. Behind her, the room continued to buzz with low chatter. A few people leaned in, some amused, others curious. They didn't expect anything remarkable. To them, this was simply a moment of entertainment, something unusual that would add humor to their evening. She took a slow breath. The soft hum of conversations faded a little as she tried to prepare herself. Memories of old lessons came back. Long evenings in a small room with a second-hand keyboard. Hours spent practicing until her fingers hurt. The joy she felt when a melody finally came together. All of it felt distant, almost like it belonged to someone else. Her life had changed so much since then. Her family had needed help, and she had stepped away from music to earn money. Job after job replaced the time she once spent practicing. She told herself it didn't matter, that music was something she could live without. But now, sitting in front of the piano again, she felt the truth settle inside her. She had missed it more than she ever admitted. She glanced at the organizer, who gave her an encouraging nod. The guests watched with polite curiosity, waiting to see what would happen. She pressed down on a single key. A soft note floated across the room. The sound was simple, almost fragile, but it felt like something inside her awakened. She pressed another key, then another, slowly forming a gentle tune, something small, something safe. The music wasn't strong yet, but it carried a quiet emotion that made a few guests turn fully toward her. Her fingers felt stiff at first, but she kept going. She tried to ignore the eyes on her and focus only on the keys. She played a short melody she remembered from years ago, one she used to practice when she was younger. The room grew slightly quieter. Some people stopped speaking mid-sentence, not because the melody was perfect, but because it didn't sound like a joke. It didn't sound like something a random waitress would be able to do. She felt the shift. The early tension in her shoulders softened just a little. Each note felt easier than the last. Her breathing evened out. She began to trust the piano again, like reconnecting with an old friend. The guests leaned in more, the small amusement in their faces fading into something different. Interest, curiosity, even respect. For the first time in a long while, the waitress wasn't thinking about her job, her long shifts, or the pressure of bills waiting at home. She was thinking only about the music, the way the keys moved under her fingers. The rhythm, the familiar patterns she had once practiced again and again. And as she played, something began to change in the room. Conversations dimmed. Laughter paused. Even those who had mocked her earlier quieted down. No one expected what was happening. No one expected her to be anything more than a shy worker, just doing her job. But as the melody continued, the atmosphere in the hall shifted completely. The soft hum of the evening turned into a focused silence. People listened. And for the first time that night, the invisible waitress was no longer invisible. As the soft melody floated into the room, a strange feeling spread across the hall. At first, it was only a few people turning their heads, curious and mildly surprised. But slowly, the sound of clinking glasses and low conversations faded, replaced by a growing hush that seemed to move through the crowd like a quiet wave. The guests didn't know what to expect when the waitress first touched the keys. Many had expected a few broken notes or an awkward attempt. But now, something about her playing made them pause. The waitress herself felt as if her body was split into two parts. One part was the nervous worker who feared making a mistake in front of so many people. The other part was the child she once was, the child who loved the piano more than anything else. The child who stayed up late practicing, hoping maybe one day to stand on a real stage. That part of her, the part she had hidden away for years, slowly began to wake up. She played the small melodies she remembered from her early lessons. It was simple, gentle, and familiar. The piano felt cold at first, but now the keys warmed under her fingers. There was something comforting about feeling the smooth surface of each key, the predictable response when she pressed down. Her fingers, though out of practice, remembered more than she expected. Her breathing steadied. Her shoulders loosened. She allowed herself to sit a little straighter. She did not look at the audience behind her. If she turned around and saw their expressions, she knew fear would rise again and break the fragile calm she had found. So she kept her eyes on the piano, letting the music be her only guide. But while she didn't turn around, the audience watched her closely. At first with curiosity, then with growing interest. The earlier laughter had disappeared. Something about the way her hands moved from note to note, from soft passages to the slightly stronger ones, made it clear that she wasn't just pressing keys randomly. She knew what she was doing. The event organizer stood off to the side, arms crossed, eyes wide with surprise. He had expected maybe a few seconds of music, enough to entertain the playful guest who requested it. But now he found himself freezing in place, unable to look away. As she continued to play, her mind drifted back to her childhood. She remembered the small apartment where she grew up, the old keyboard her family had bought secondhand because they couldn't afford a real piano. It had missing keys and a buzzy sound, but it was enough for her to learn. She spent hours practicing songs she found in old music books, borrowed from a nearby library. Her teacher back then had once told her, "You have something special." But life had changed quickly. Her family needed more help, and she took on part-time jobs. Her lessons were replaced with responsibilities. Music became a luxury she couldn't afford. These memories moved through her mind like scenes from an old film. They made the moment she was living now feel surreal. It was as if fate, after pushing her away from the piano for so long, had suddenly brought her back to it in the most unexpected place. The melody grew stronger. She allowed herself to explore the keys a little, adding small flourishes here and there. Nothing too loud, nothing too bold, just delicate touches that came from her instinct. She had not planned any of it. The music simply flowed behind her. A few guests leaned forward, their eyes narrowing as they tried to understand what they were hearing. One woman whispered to her partner, "She isn't just playing randomly. She knows technique. Look at her posture." The partner nodded slowly. "Maybe she learned somewhere. She's surprisingly good." The man who had made the joke earlier stood with a half smile that faded little by little. He expected to be amused, but amusement was no longer what he felt. What replaced it was something like confusion and mild admiration, and then, quietly, embarrassment. Meanwhile, the waitress reached a point where she could have stopped. The melody she remembered had come to its natural end, and she could have lifted her hands, stood up, and walked away. That would have been safe, expected, acceptable, but she didn't. Stop. Something about the stillness in the room urged her to continue. Maybe it was the rare chance to play a real piano again. Maybe it was the feeling she hadn't felt in years, the feeling of losing herself in music. Whatever it was, she let her fingers move into another tune, one she had played only a few times in her life. It was more complex, requiring more confidence. The notes grew a little bolder. Someone in the audience whispered, Is she trained? Another replied softly, She has to be. Someone else murmured, I can't believe this. The organizer took a few steps forward, trying to see her hands better. He noticed the precision in her wrist movements, the subtle control with which she shifted from soft strokes to firmer ones. She played like someone who had once practiced seriously, not like someone who learned randomly. Her heart raced, but not from fear anymore. It raced from something else, something like happiness. Her fingers were stiff at the start, but now the stiffness had faded. Music came back to her slowly, like a friend returning after years apart. A memory surfaced, one of her teenage years, when she once performed at a small school event. The stage had been tiny, the audience mostly parents and teachers. But she remembered how the lights felt on her face, how nervous she was at first, and how powerful the moment became once she started playing. That had been the last time she played in front of people. Until now. Back in the present, the room continued to grow quieter. Even waiters carrying trays slowed their steps to listen. The sound of the piano reached every corner, touching people who didn't even know her name. The waitress felt a lump in her throat, but she kept playing. She didn't want the moment to end, not yet. Her fingers moved into another series of notes, forming a new phrase that carried a soft sadness. It wasn't planned. It wasn't rehearsed. It came from her heart, reflecting years of silent struggles, responsibilities, and quiet hopes she never spoke out loud. A woman near the front placed a hand on her chest, feeling something emotional rise within her. She didn't understand why a simple melody played by a stranger had touched her so deeply, but the feeling was real. The waitress still didn't turn around. She feared breaking whatever fragile magic she had created by accident. She just kept her eyes on the keys, letting the music guide her. The guests who had originally been talking loudly fell completely silent. Some leaned on tables, others stood with arms crossed, but all listened. A few even glanced at each other, as if to confirm they weren't imagining the talent they were witnessing. The organizer whispered to a colleague, How did we not know she could play like this? His colleague shrugged, stunned. She's been here for months and never said anything. The organizer shook his head. Some people carry whole stories inside them that no one ever sees. Meanwhile, the waitress allowed herself to shift into yet another small piece. This one quicker, requiring her fingers to move with more precision. She wasn't sure she could manage it, but her instincts guided her. The piano responded beautifully, its sound filling the hall. For the first time in years, she felt powerful. Not powerful in a loud or proud way, but powerful in the sense that she was no longer hiding a piece of herself. She remembered moments when she used to dream of becoming a real musician. She wanted to travel, perform, and inspire others. Life had taken those dreams away, but the spark had never vanished completely. It simply waited. And now, in a room full of strangers who never noticed her before, the spark returned. Her fingers danced softly across the keys. She felt the music growing inside her, pushing her forward. Every note seemed to carry a piece of her past, a piece of her present, and maybe even a small piece of her future. The man who once mocked her felt his pride fade more and more. He lowered his eyes, feeling almost ashamed. People around him no longer looked amused. They looked moved. They looked impressed. It wasn't just skill they were hearing. It was emotion. The waitress didn't notice their reactions, but she could sense the room's silence. The silence wasn't empty. It was full, filled with something she couldn't name. Something warm, something heavy, something true. And as she moved deeper into the music, she felt a small tear roll down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She didn't break her rhythm. She just played. The moment her fingers slipped into a deeper melody, something shifted in the air. It was not a loud change, not something anyone could name directly, but more like an invisible current sweeping through the hall. The notes were soft at first, but they carried a certain weight like memories, like emotions pressed into sound. For the first time since she sat down, the waitress felt truly connected to the piano. The earlier nerves had melted away, replaced by a quiet confidence she didn't know she still had. She felt as if she was returning to a part of herself that had been asleep for years. Every note she played pulled her a little further into that older version of her, one who dreamed without fear. Behind her, several guests stood completely still, their eyes fixed on her back and her moving hands. The room had grown so quiet that even the smallest sound from the piano seemed to echo. People who had come to the gala, expecting nothing more than fancy food and polite conversations, now found themselves witnessing something they never expected. The waitress didn't know how many people were watching her. She kept her gaze locked on the keys, letting the music guide her. She didn't dare turn around. She was afraid that seeing the crowd would snap her out of the moment. It felt like she was balancing on something fragile. One wrong move, one broken thought, and it would all collapse. But the longer she played, the stronger she felt. Her fingers began to move more naturally, sliding from one note to another. She pressed harder when the music needed strength, and softened her touch when the melody called for gentleness. At times she surprised herself with how quickly her hands reacted, as if they were remembering old patterns without needing to think. A man near the front whispered, "She plays like she's lived inside the music." A woman beside him nodded. "It's more than skill. There's emotion in every note." The man who had teased her earlier leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. His expression had changed completely. The smirk he once wore had faded into something almost regretful. He didn't understand how a waitress, someone he had barely acknowledged, could play in a way that pulled him in so deeply. The organizer stood near the piano, stunned. He had expected a small moment of entertainment, something quick and simple. But he hadn't expected this. He watched her with a mix of disbelief and admiration. He wondered how someone working in the shadows of the hotel could carry such hidden talent. The music suddenly shifted into a more emotional passage. The notes were richer, fuller, as if she were telling a story without using words. Each sound grew into the next, weaving a feeling through the room. People listened in silence, some frozen in place, others holding their breath. For the waitress, the music had stopped being just notes. It had become a window to her past. She felt everything she had kept buried for years, the dreams she let go of, the responsibilities that weighed on her, the struggles she handled quietly without asking for help. All of it rose to the surface, pouring out through her fingertips. She felt a tightness in her throat, but she kept playing. The piano had become her voice, and she didn't want to let it fall silent. She poured her feelings into every note, letting the music speak for her in ways she never could with words. Someone in the audience blinked away tears. "This is unbelievable," they whispered. Another nodded, unable to look away. "It doesn't feel like she's performing. It feels like she's remembering something." The waitress didn't hear them, but she could feel the room's growing stillness. She sensed the attention, the silence, the heat of the lights above her. She felt the weight of everything around her, but instead of shrinking from it, she embraced it. The melody grew stronger, more confident. Her fingers brushed the keys with determination, moving through a sequence that demanded precision. Her heart pounded, but not out of fear, out of passion. As she continued to play, she remembered nights when she practiced after long school days, her fingers stiff from working part-time jobs. She remembered her younger siblings sitting nearby, listening even though they didn't always understand the music. She remembered the dream of performing on a stage, the dream she had forced herself to bury under the weight of reality. The notes turned into a declaration, a quiet reminder of who she once was and who she still could be. The guests stood mesmerized. Even people at the back, who could barely see her, leaned forward, drawn by the sound alone. The staff in the kitchen peeked out through the doorways, surprised by the sudden hush. Some waiters stepped closer, holding their trays carefully as they watched the scene unfold. The organizer whispered to himself, "This is not just talent. This is heart." A soft part of the melody came next, almost like a whisper. Her fingers slowed, each note releasing gently into the room. The quietness was so heavy that even the smallest sound seemed to carry a story. She let the piano breathe between phrases, allowing the silence to fill with emotion. The man who once mocked her swallowed hard. He lowered his gaze, ashamed of his earlier words. He had always believed talent belonged to people in big stages, expensive halls, and glamorous clothes. It had never crossed his mind that someone in a staff uniform could hold something so extraordinary. Slowly, the music began to rise again. Her fingers tightened their movement, pressing harder with intensity. The melody sharpened, carrying a sense of determination. It was as if she were pushing through something heavy, breaking through layers of silence that had once held her back. Her heart pounded, matching the rhythm. She felt the weight of the years she had spent away from the piano, the frustration of lost time, the longing she never allowed herself to acknowledge. But instead of letting those feelings pull her down, she used them as fuel. Her hands moved faster. The music grew louder. It filled the room with emotion so strong that some guests felt goosebumps rise on their arms. A woman near the front covered her mouth, overwhelmed by the sound. Another clasped her hands together, as if praying silently. The waitress started to feel something inside her shift, something warm spreading through her chest. She wasn't just playing anymore. She was reclaiming a piece of herself she thought she had lost forever. She reached a part of the piece that required skill, a section she hadn't practiced in years. She hesitated for a split second, fear flickering in her chest. But then she pushed forward, trusting her instincts. Her hands moved with surprising confidence. The notes spilled out perfectly, each one landing exactly where it belonged. Her touch was steady, strong, and emotional. Gasps echoed softly through the room. Someone whispered, "This is unbelievable." Another said, "She's playing like a professional." The waitress didn't hear them. She felt every part of her body vibrating with energy. Her shoulders relaxed fully. Her back straightened. Her fingers were now moving with a freedom she hadn't felt since she was young. She suddenly remembered sitting by a window, practicing a fast passage on her old keyboard while listening to the rain outside. She remembered how she would repeat the same segment again and again until her fingers ached. She remembered her teacher's voice, praising her when she finally got it right. Those memories pushed her forward. She felt stronger. The piece reached its most intense moment. Her hands moved quickly, dancing across the piano with purpose. The sound filled the room like a rising tide. Every note carried emotion, as if she were releasing years of feelings she had bottled up. The guests stood in awe. They had never expected to witness something so raw, so real, at a fancy gala. They had come for entertainment, but what they received was something deeper. As she moved through the final moments of the passage, her breathing grew heavy, not from exhaustion, but from emotion. Her eyes glistened, but she blinked away the forming tears. The melody softened again. She transitioned into a gentle ending, each note carefully placed. It felt like a quiet goodbye, a soft landing after a storm. The room was completely silent. Her final notes floated like feathers through the hall. She held the last one just long enough to let it fill the silence, then gently lifted her fingers. For a long moment, nothing happened. No one clapped. No one moved. The silence was thick, full of something powerful. It was the kind of silence that only happened when people were too stunned to react. The waitress kept her hands hovering over the keys. She wasn't sure if she should stand up or stay seated. Her chest rose and fell with deep breaths, her heart pounding like a drum. Then somewhere in the middle of the room. A single person began to clap, another joined, and another in seconds. The entire room erupted with applause, loud, echoing, overwhelming applause. People stood up, some even cheering. A few had tears in their eyes. The waitress blinked, startled. She had expected nothing like this. She had only wanted to play something small, something safe. She never imagined this. She lowered her hands slowly and looked at the crowd for the first time. What she saw left her speechless. Every face, once filled with boredom or amusement, now showed genuine admiration. For the first time in years, she felt seen. The morning after the event felt strangely heavy, as if the world around her was still holding its breath from the night before. She woke up earlier than usual, long before her alarm, and lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling. The sun had barely begun to paint the room with soft light, yet she felt as though she had been awake for hours. Her thoughts kept circling the same moment over and over again. The moment. She sat at the piano in front of all those people. It wasn't something she planned. She had never tried to prove anything to anyone. She only wanted to help, to fix a moment that was about to fall apart. But now, everyone was talking about her. The guests, the staff, even people she didn't know. And while some part inside her felt warm, another part felt nervous. She got up slowly, washed her face, and stared at her reflection in the mirror. The same face she saw every day. The same tired eyes. Nothing on the outside had changed, yet inside she felt something shifting. Almost like standing at a crossroads without realizing how she got there. She walked to work with a little more caution that morning. Normally, she kept her head down, moving quietly through the familiar streets. But today she felt eyes on her, even though no one seemed to actually be looking. Maybe it was just in her head. Maybe she was imagining everything. But her steps felt different. When she pushed the door open and stepped into the service area of the venue, she expected people to act normal. She expected them to nod or greet her softly, like they always did. But the moment she walked in, conversations paused for half a breath. Heads turned. Not all of them, just enough for her to know the news had spread. One of her coworkers rushed up to her with a grin so wide it almost looked painful. "There you are," he said loudly. "I knew it was you. I mean, I didn't know, but something told me you weren't just another person here. You always had that quiet glow, you know. Not everyone saw it, but she smiled politely and tried to calm him with a gentle nod. "It was just a small thing," she said softly. "Small?" He laughed. "People are still talking about it. Management wants to see you. They've been waiting since morning." He pointed in the direction of the office. Her heart thudded. Management? Waiting? Since morning? She tried to ask him what they wanted, but he had already rushed away to finish his tasks. She stood there for a moment, letting the information settle. The office door seemed farther away than usual. When she knocked and entered, the manager looked up with an expression she had never seen from him, something between surprise, pride, and confusion. "Please sit," he said. She sat carefully in front of the desk. "You caused quite the stir last night," he continued. "And I mean that in a good way. The guests were going on and on about you, even after the event ended. Some of them stayed back just to ask your name." He paused, then leaned forward. "I didn't even know you played. Why didn't you ever mention it?" She lowered her eyes. It wasn't a story she liked telling. "It's something from long ago," she said quietly. "Something I left behind." The manager studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Well, whatever your reasons are, you have a gift. A real one. People noticed, and someone asked if they could speak with you today. They're waiting in the lounge." He gestured toward the door. Her breath caught again. "Someone? Waiting for her? She didn't know if she was ready to face anyone. She didn't want attention not like this, but she couldn't refuse. She got up and walked toward the lounge with small, careful steps. Inside, she found a woman sitting by the window. She looked elegant but calm, not like the kind of person who would scare someone with her presence. When she looked up, her eyes were warm. "You must be the one who played last night," the woman said kindly. She nodded. "I hope I'm not troubling you by meeting you like this," the woman continued. "I wanted to thank you personally. Your playing, it was something special. It wasn't just skill. It had emotion. Real emotion. People rarely play like that anymore." The woman wasn't speaking loudly or dramatically. Her voice was steady and thoughtful, as if she really meant every word. "I'm glad it helped," the young woman replied shyly. "Helped? My dear, it transformed the entire evening." The woman smiled softly. "But that wasn't the only reason I came. I work closely with a foundation that supports young artists. We help people who have talent but lack opportunities. When I heard you play last night, I felt something I haven't felt in a long time. I wondered, would you be willing to come to a small meeting we're hosting next week? Just a gathering of musicians. Nothing formal. You don't even need to commit to anything. Just attend. See if it feels right." Her heart squeezed. A gathering of musicians? People like her? People she once dreamed of being around? I don't know," she whispered. "You don't need to answer now," the woman said gently. "Take your time. Here's my card." She took it carefully, as though it were something fragile. When the woman left, the room felt still again. Too still. She held the card between her fingers and stared at the letters printed neatly across it. Even the paper felt important. All morning, coworkers kept coming up to talk to her. Some praised her gently, some teased her lightly, some simply wanted to hear the story. A few of them looked at her differently, not in a bad way, but with a kind of curiosity, as if they had discovered a secret she had been hiding. By afternoon, she found herself growing overwhelmed. The attention was too much. She had spent years being invisible, moving through life with soft footsteps and quiet breaths. Now, every corner seemed louder. During her break, she slipped outside for fresh air. She sat at the edge of the staff area, where the noise of the street blended softly with the wind. She let herself breathe, and that's when one of the guests from the previous night approached. He wasn't dressed like he had been at the event. Today he seemed more relaxed, more normal in his simple shirt and calm expression. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said politely. She shook her head. "I wanted to thank you," he continued. "Last night, your playing reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Music used to be a big part of my life. Somewhere along the way, I lost it. Hearing you brought it back for a moment. I just wanted you to know that." His words were simple, but they touched her deeply. She didn't know what to say, so she simply nodded. After he left, she sat quietly, thinking. She had spent years hiding her music, fearing it, avoiding it. But last night, just one moment had changed everything. People had heard her. People had felt something. The idea scared her, but it also warmed her. When her shift ended, she walked home with slower steps than usual. The card from the woman stayed in her pocket, its edges pressing gently against her fingers as she walked. Her small apartment felt different tonight. She set her bag down and looked at the corner where her old keyboard sat, untouched for months, maybe years. She walked toward it slowly and lifted the cover. Dust floated softly in the air. She ran her fingers over the keys. She didn't play. Not yet, but for the first time in a long time she wanted to. She sat there quietly, letting the moment sink in. And then she whispered to herself, almost too softly to hear, "Maybe it's time." The next few days moved slowly, almost too slowly for her liking. Ever since the woman had handed her the card and invited her to the gathering, she found it hard to think about anything else. It lingered in her mind the way a soft melody lingers long after the music stops. She tried to push it away, to focus on work, on her usual routine, but everything reminded her of that night, that her coworkers still talked about her performance. Some teased her kindly, some asked her when she would play again, and a few simply stared at her with quiet interest. She didn't know how to handle the attention. She wasn't used to people looking at her like she was more than just another face among many. But even with all the noise around her, there was one thing she kept hidden inside a mix of fear and hope each evening. After she finished her shift, she walked home thinking about the gathering. Part of her wanted to go, to see what it might open for her. Another part wanted to stay away, to avoid the risk of being disappointed again. Still, she couldn't forget the look on the woman's face or the warmth in her voice. It didn't feel fake. It felt real, almost as if she had seen something in her that no one else had by the fourth night. She found herself staring at her old keyboard again. She didn't touch it the first evening, nor the second. But tonight was different. She sat down slowly and placed her fingers over the keys. She didn't press them right away. Instead, she closed her eyes and took a breath. The air in the room felt still, as if it was waiting with her and she began to play. The sound was soft at first, a little unsure, like a forgotten voice rediscovering itself. Her fingers moved slowly, exploring the notes, then finding their rhythm. The music felt rusty, but it was still there somewhere deep inside her. With each passing minute, it grew clearer, warmer, more honest. She didn't play anything complicated, just a small tune she used to practice when she was younger. But even that simple melody carried old memories of long hours, of tired fingers, of dreams she once had. When she finished, the room fell silent again. She opened her eyes and stared at the keyboard with a strange mix of sadness and peace. She had missed this more than she realized. The next morning, she made her decision. After her shift ended, she walked back to the lounge area where the woman had sat days earlier. She took out the card and stared at it for a moment. Her hands trembled slightly, but she didn't let that stop her. She dialed the number. The woman answered on the second ring. "Hello?" Her voice was just as warm as she remembered. "It's me," the young woman said softly. "The one from the event. I wanted to say yes. I'll come." There was a pause, gentle, almost like a smile being formed. "I'm very glad," the woman replied. "We'll be expecting you. You don't have to bring anything. Just yourself." After the call ended, she felt both relieved and nervous. Saying yes was just the first step. What came next was still unknown. The gathering was scheduled for the weekend, and she spent the next few days trying to prepare herself emotionally. She didn't have fancy clothes. She didn't have a new look to present. She wasn't sure what people would expect. But she promised herself she wouldn't try to be anything other than who she truly was. When the day finally came, she woke up early. The air outside felt fresh, almost too fresh, as if the world itself knew she was stepping into something new. She dressed in simple clothes, clean, neat, and comfortable. She tied her hair quietly and looked at herself in the mirror. Her reflection looked nervous, but also a little determined. She took a deep breath before leaving her apartment. The meeting place wasn't far, just a quiet hall on a peaceful street lined with old trees. She walked slowly, clutching the card in her hand, letting her steps match the rhythm of the morning breeze. When she arrived, she hesitated near the entrance. Through the door, she could hear soft chatter and the faint sound of instruments being tuned. It was unfamiliar, yet strangely comforting. Before she could retreat into her thoughts, the door opened and the woman appeared with a gentle smile. "You made it," she said warmly. The young woman nodded. "Come inside. You're welcome here." She followed her in. The room was filled with people, some older, some younger, some dressed casually, others dressed neatly. But everyone seemed relaxed, talking quietly or preparing their instruments. The atmosphere felt peaceful. A few people glanced her way, but no one stared. No one judged. They simply smiled politely before returning to their conversations. The woman led her to a small group sitting in a circle. "Everyone," she said, "this is the young lady I told you about. She's the one who played at the event last week." The group looked at her with friendly eyes. One man nodded and said, "We're glad to have you. Make yourself comfortable." She sat down slowly. The woman explained that the gathering wasn't formal. It was meant to be a safe space where musicians could share their experiences, talk about their journeys, and support each other. For a long time, she simply listened. One person talked about losing confidence after a failed audition. Another shared how they had stopped playing for years because of family issues. Someone else confessed they were still trying to figure out what they wanted from music. Every story felt human, honest, real. She had never been in a place where people spoke so openly. Then the woman turned to her gently. "Would you like to share something?" "Only if you feel comfortable." Her heart pounded. She wanted to say no. She wanted to stay quiet. But something inside her whispered that maybe this was the moment she had been avoiding for far too long. She took a small breath. "I used to play," she began softly. "A lot when I was younger. It meant everything to me. But life changed. I had to work. Things got difficult. I stopped playing. I thought I wasn't meant for it anymore." Her voice trembled a little. "Last week, when I played again, something came back. I don't know what exactly, but I felt something I hadn't felt in years. And I don't know where this will lead. I'm still scared, but I'm here because I want to find out." The group didn't clap or cheer. They simply listened with quiet respect. A few nodded. One smiled gently. Another whispered, "That's brave." And for the first time in a long time, she felt understood. Later, someone asked if she wanted to play something. The room had a small upright piano in the corner. Its wood was old, but well cared for. She stared at it for a moment, unsure if she was ready, but the group looked at her with patience. Not pressure. She walked to the piano slowly and sat down. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a moment before she began playing. The melody was the same simple tune she practiced at home earlier that week. But here, with people listening quietly and kindly, it felt different. It felt alive. When she finished, the group didn't explode with praise. They simply smiled warmly, sincerely. "Beautiful," someone whispered. "You have a gentle touch," another said. She lowered her eyes, feeling warmth rise in her chest. After the gathering ended, the woman walked with her outside. "You did well today," she said softly. "Remember, there's no rush. Music isn't a race. It's a path. And you've taken your first step back." The young woman nodded quietly. As she walked home, the evening sky glowed with soft shades of orange and pink. She moved slowly, absorbing everything she had experienced. For the first time in years, she didn't feel lost. She felt like someone who was slowly, carefully finding her way back to herself. The days that followed felt different, almost as if the world around her had shifted in a quiet but certain way. Nothing dramatic happened, no loud announcements or sudden changes, but something inside her had moved. It was gentle, steady, and real. For the first time in years, she felt like she had a direction again. Not a fixed path, not a perfect plan, just a direction. And that was enough. She returned to work the next morning with a lighter step. Her coworkers still brought up her performance from time to time, but now she knew how to smile without feeling overwhelmed. They weren't trying to push her into anything. They were just proud, and for once, she let herself feel that warmth instead of running from it. She kept going to the music gatherings too. Each week, she grew a little more confident. Not because she became perfect, but because she stopped expecting herself to be. The group never made her feel judged. They understood struggle, fear, hesitation. They celebrated small steps, and it helped her learn how to celebrate her own. Yet even with this new sense of comfort, she felt something deeper forming inside her, a quiet hope she hadn't let herself touch for years. One evening, after another gathering, the woman who had first invited her asked if she could talk privately. They sat near the window, where the warm light from the street lamps spilled softly into the room. "You've grown a lot in a short time," the woman said kindly. She lowered her eyes slightly. "I'm trying." "You're doing more than trying," the woman replied. "You're opening up again. That's not easy after everything you've been through. But I want to ask you something. And please know, there's no pressure to say yes." She looked up with quiet curiosity. "There's an event coming next month," the woman explained. "It's not large nothing like the gathering you accidentally played at. It's a small charity night we host each year. We invite musicians who are still growing, still exploring their voice. I think you'd fit perfectly. I would love for you to play one piece there. Just one." Her breath caught. "A performance? In front of people?" "I'm not sure if I'm ready," she whispered. The woman smiled gently. "That's fine. I didn't ask for an answer right now. I just wanted you to have the option. Think about it. Imagine it. See how it feels in your heart. And whatever you decide will be the right choice." When she walked home that night, her thoughts felt heavier than usual, but not in a painful way. More like carrying something new, something that mattered. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if she could really do it. She wasn't a star. She wasn't someone who trained in famous schools or performed on stages designed for greatness. She was a waitress who played a piano because she didn't want a room full of strangers to feel embarrassed. But in doing that, she had opened a door she didn't even know existed. The next few weeks passed softly. She worked, attended gatherings, and practiced a little each night. She didn't push herself too hard. She didn't set strict schedules. She just played because she wanted to. And that alone made her music breathe again. Sometimes she would stop mid-practice and laugh quietly. It felt strange to enjoy something she had once abandoned out of fear and exhaustion. One night, she sat at her keyboard long after her neighbors had gone quiet. The moonlight poured through the window, giving the room a calm silver glow. Her fingers moved over the keys without thinking. And in that peaceful moment, she realized something. She wanted to play at the event, not to impress anyone, not for fame, not for applause. She wanted to play because music was a part of her that she didn't want to lose again. The next day, she called the woman and said softly, "I'll do it." The woman didn't respond with excitement or surprise. She simply said, "I'm proud of you. Let's work together to make sure you feel comfortable." And so they began. The woman arranged a quiet rehearsal space where she could practice without interruptions. Sometimes members of the group would stop by to listen, offering gentle feedback or just sitting silently to give her company. They never tried to change her style. They never tried to mold her into someone else. They wanted her to play as herself. She chose a piece she had always loved, simple, emotional, and honest. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't technically demanding. But it carried her story. Every note reflected a step she had taken. Every pause reflected a moment she had survived. As the event date approached, she felt nervous, but it wasn't the crushing fear she once knew. It was the kind of nervousness that comes when something truly matters. On the evening of the event, she stood backstage in a small room, listening to the soft chatter of the audience. This time, the crowd wasn't elite or intimidating. They were ordinary people who came to support a cause they cared about. The woman approached her with a warm smile. "How do you feel?" "Nervous," she admitted. "Good," the woman said gently. "It means you care. Just remember, this isn't about perfection. It's about connection. You have that gift. Let it speak." When her turn came, she walked out slowly. The lights weren't bright or blinding. The room was warm, cozy, and filled with faces that looked kind. Some clapped softly as she approached the piano. She sat down and placed her hands on the keys. Her heart pounded, but she took one steady breath. Then she began to play. The notes flowed softly at first, like a memory unfolding. Her fingers moved with gentle confidence, not rushing, not hesitating. She didn't think about the crowd or the mistakes she feared she might make. She just played. Halfway through, she felt a warmth rise in her chest, a feeling she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't pride. It wasn't relief. It was belonging. This was where her heart had always been. This was what she had buried under layers of life's difficulties. This was her dot when she reached the final note. The room stayed silent for a second, an honest, quiet second before soft applause filled the air. Not loud, not overwhelming, just sincere. She looked up and saw faces smiling, eyes softened, some even glistening with emotion. It wasn't the kind of applause that celebrated brilliance. It was the kind that celebrated truth. The woman stepped forward once she stood up from the piano and whispered, "You found your way back." On the walk home that night, she didn't rush. The city felt softer, the air calmer. Her heart was steady. She didn't know what her future would look like, whether she would pursue music professionally or simply keep it as something personal and precious. But she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't lost anymore. She had stepped to the piano once out of necessity. But now, she stepped toward it because she chose to, because it was part of who she was. And this time, she wasn't letting it go again. That the journey wasn't about becoming famous or proving something to the world. It was about rediscovering herself. And she had done that quietly, gently, beautifully. As she reached her apartment, she whispered to herself with a soft smile, "This is just the beginning."